Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Chicago Archaeological Society today. For those that don't know about us, we have been around for something like 100 years in some way, shape, or form. And what we do is we put together discussions on archaeology, anthropology, and history. And we bring in some wonderful academics from the Chicagoland area and beyond on a number of subjects. Our mission is to better understand the existence of mankind, humankind. All right. So we are but one chapter in a group of many chapters around Illinois. We belong to the Illinois Association for the Advancement of Archaeology. Let me bring up their website. The many chapters of the IAAA, as we call them, exist in Illinois with the mission to better understand the archaeology of Illinois, which there is quite a bit. And we're going to get into some local archaeology in just a moment. All right. And by joining the CAS, the Chicago Archaeological Society, you also get membership in the IAAA. So you get a twofer. And part of that membership is, well, you get to support meetings like this, and you get great publications. Our newsletter comes out, the Codex, that comes out several times a year, I believe something like 8 or 9 times a year. And that discuss the many things that we're doing and archaeological research in the area and beyond. You also get regular publications from the IAAA on the archaeology of Illinois. For those that would like to renew their membership or join, just go to chicagoarchaeologysociety.com and click on Join Donate. And we have our dues listed here. So hope you could support our organization. Without you, we can't do these things. All right, today we have Jessica Bishop. She is an MA student in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Illinois at Chicago, UIC. Her academic research focuses on North American history, zooarchaeology, with a particular interest in exploring human-animal relationships beyond substantive, and within battlefield context. Since 2022, she has worked for the Center for the Recovery and Identification of the Missing at UIC in partnership with the Defense POWMIA Accounting Agency. She engages in research and fieldwork relating to the missing personnel from World War II in the Philippines. She holds a bachelor degree from UIC and Columbia College. Today, she will be discussing a site just outside of Chicago of a near complete horse skeleton. Please, everyone, welcome Jessica Bishop.
Everyone. Hopefully you can see me. So I'm a graduate student at University of Illinois at Chicago. Oh, hold on one second. How do I see the PowerPoint?
Oh, it disappeared.
Yeah, so sorry.
Oh, it's okay. No worries. There we go.
Thank you.
And could you please speak into the microphone?
The microphone doesn't really work.
Doesn't work. The day I was here, checked out this room.
Can you?
Wow, now, and untangle the cord and leave it right there.
Does it work?
That should work.
Does this sound like anything?
No.
No, it says it's on.
Okay.
Hello? I can just try to talk really loud.
That would be helpful.
Okay,
You use your classroom voice.
okay. Just signal if I'm getting too quiet.
Like we're squirrely 8-year-old.
Okay,
I am the teacher voice.
okay.
Is that any better?
No.
No. Yeah, this is not good.
That's,
Test. 1, 2, 3.
that's, well, it did for a minute. When you tap on it, it makes a sound, but then when you speak it, it doesn't. Too late to.
Okay, I'll just talk very loud. So my focus is on historical zooarchaeology, and this project is kind of what got me started into that. It was my undergraduate thesis, which I finished in 2023, December 2023, but I've been kind of continuously working on it. And we kind of just had all these horse bones sitting around the department. And someone before me kind of collected them all together, and they were just sitting in my advisor's office for I don't know how long before I got there, and someone was cleaning them and all that. But I was looking for a project. It was my, I think, first or second semester at UIC, and my professor just said, "Do you want to sort some horse bones?" And we didn't know that there would be anything interesting about them. They were just apparently part of a teaching collection. And so I started researching it, and we figured out that maybe there was more to it, which I will obviously get into. So this horse, which I'll probably call the portage horse at different times, in case I say that, it was excavated in the 70s near the Chicago Portage area. And the portage, in case anyone doesn't know, is just where they would transfer boats between the Des Plaines and Chicago River during different points of flooding. And the site was excavated for a possible association with what was called the Loudon Trading Post. And the horse, after the excavation, was brought to the university for some reason or another that's unclear. And the rumor around the department was that it was a police horse. And it was just something that people had been saying for years, and we had no idea if that was true. So I just wanted to mention that there's very little comparatives for historic North American horses. And so kind of ended up being a unique opportunity to build on some of that data. And as I mentioned, a lot of these elements, each bone was isolated in the department over time. So they had to kind of bring it together. They were unorganized. But when I started putting them together like that in the picture, I realized that there was a site number and everything on, and a feature number. So that at that point, we could determine that it was a near complete individual after we organized it, and it warranted further research, which was very exciting. So it became an exercise to see if the skeleton had any clues about its origins. And to explain the title, it was, is this a horse a Brego or a Bill? So Brego was Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, horse, big stallion, and then Bill was Sam the ponies. So essentially, is this a draft pony or is it like a stallion? And they're both good horses, but they were bred for different activities. So can these bones maybe tell us one or the other? So the overall goal was to develop a life history and attempt to achieve a broader understanding of the Chicago Portage area and of the horse, of course. So to do so, establish an age, sex, and the stature or size of the portage horse. Identify and analyze any of the pathologies that may be on the horse. Any osteological modifications that could reflect the work performed, kind of like how based on our professions, we have different things that go wrong with our bones and different arthritis at different times. The horse can show us the same thing. And then, of course, historical research on the background of the Portage area. And I did this throughout the 1800s and the early 1900s just to cast a wide net. And then use all of this data to test the hypothesis that was in the department, which is this is a police horse. Okay, So some of the historical background, as I mentioned, the portage was a land bridge that connects the two rivers. It was typically remembered for the Joliet and Marquette expeditions in the late 17th century, and then later the Loudon brothers, which I will get into. There was also indigenous occupation and prehistoric occupation and evidence of all of that, but I'm just going to focus on 1820 to 1930-ish. Okay, so the Loudon brothers, they had a trading post between 1828 and 1834, and then they had near simultaneous deaths around 1834, which is interesting. And they also owned a tavern where they probably lived, and that was about 1.5 miles northwest. Can you all see it if I use this little laser pointer?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the tavern, and then that would be the trading post. Their brother-in-law, Stephen Forbes, was the first elected sheriff, and elected matters because there's also an appointed. And he was their brother-in-law. And I adapted this map from a kind of one of those local history books that were written by local people. So a lot of these books are kind of iffy on how historically accurate they always were. So keep that in mind. But I also wanted to point out to everyone that there's a lot of other things going on here. You know, the brewery, there were several horse farms, there were cattle farms. So horses everywhere, of course. So the Loudon brothers, the tavern was and the trading post were at this intersection of waterways. So that made them pretty important in Chicago history at the time. Of course, this is very early Chicago history because it was barely a town at that point. They were visited by Juliet and John Kinsey, and she wrote a very famous history book called Waboon. And her husband, John Kinsey, was the first appointed sheriff of Cook County. The Loudons also possibly hosted a stagecoach shop. People fleeing from the Black Hawk War on their way to Fort Dearborn, and several elections at one of their places. There is a lot of conflicting documentation on where certain events took place. Did it happen at this tavern? Did it happen at this stage or the trading post? It's a little iffy, and I think sometimes people were probably using those terms a little interchangeably. And that land was left either for David Loudon's son or a brother-in-law, which would probably be Stephen, because that's the only one around that was mentioned, but maybe not. And later land purchases, William Ogden, you know, Chicago railroad magnate, first mayor, owned part of this land as part of 73 acres. He didn't have any children, so when he died, his nieces and nephews were left everything. So Laura Wheeler was his niece, and she took possession of the land. Of course, this was contested a bunch of times. But then in 1914, the Gervenis owned the land, and the Forest Preserve then acquired the land in 1917. This does get a little dicey because there's like two different pieces of land that bump up against each other that are state-owned or were state-owned. So yeah, some of that might be a little sketchy. But I wanted to point out this picture on the right. After this land was purchased, it was reported as trampled down, which I think you can kind of see in this picture, which was taken by local Robert Knight in 1921. He believed that this is where the trading post was or had been. Of course, this is almost 100 years later. And then him and his historical partner later collaborated on even making a historical marker for the area. Okay. So as reported by a local history book, people in the department, some of the original field work, it was maybe a rehabilitative horse pasture, this land at one point or another. I did end up calling the local historical society over there, and I got kind of, well, that's what they say, which was not entirely helpful, but I guess kind of confirmed it in one way or the other. But another one of those local history books reported that a quote unquote Mr. McBride rented the land from 1890 to 1910, and he was keeping horses on the property. And then, of course, for a very long time, I scoured newspapers to try to find anything about a horse pasture in the area. The only thing I was able to find that mentioned like sick horses and renting the area was just this woman named Mrs. Packard. And I just want to share this because I thought it was pretty interesting. She was part of the Humane Society at the time, and she ended up going through trial because they found out that what she was doing is she was going around, and when people were abusing their horses, she she was basically purchasing the horse from them, under the guise of we're gonna save this horse, and then she would euthanize them to make a profit. And part of how you did that was, tanners and other processors would purchase dead animals all the time and process them and make a profit off them. So she was doing the same exact. Yes.
From the hook.
Yeah. Glue, anything. Anything that you could imagine, I'm sure. Fertilizer. There was also a magazine article at the time that mentioned it could have been a retirement center for police and fire horses. But again, maybe not. And one of the horses that was recovered, this article mentioned, went to UIC or University of Illinois, sorry, anatomical collection. So I assume maybe that is where this horse came from, which we'll get into a little bit more. But again, any of this is all like secondary and tertiary evidence. And historical books have inconsistencies. I found some inconsistencies in these local history books. But I was really excited to just kind of share with you all what I've found, since I don't really have a venue to share that all with. So hope it was interesting. And I just want to take a brief aside and talk about city horses at this time. There's a lot of information on like historical information in newspapers on fire horses. Not any earlier than this time because Chicago is barely even a city. But police horses are not mentioned nearly as much. I don't know why. I guess, maybe they weren't as cute. But overall, police and fire horses should have been really taken care of in comparison to a regular workhorse. They retired early before they were overworked, and they would then be sold again to farmers. Horses who instead worked in the streets, like streetcar horses, would usually just die there, and be taken for processing. Sorry. They would take them to the Chicago stockyards. We often took about 50 horses a day, and then combined with all the other animals at the time. And there was even an interesting newspaper article that was accusing these stockyards of just taking horses in the middle of the night as they were transitioning to streetcars, because they were having less and less, horse-drawn carriages and things. So they had to do something with them, I suppose. So horses, they said, were disappearing in the night. Kind of sensationalist, but it could be kind of true. The newspaper research is quite fun sometimes. Well, fun. Okay, the excavation. It took place in 1974 to 1980, and it was run by the Field Museum. And it was for high schoolers. And they only operated for 1 week a year, like in the summer, which is kind of a cool program. But it kind of tells you maybe how well they were excavating and recording information. So Dr. Brown, the first person who was operating the site, found woodland pottery, Mississippian potsherds, 1830s iron nails, pre-1950s glazed pottery, hand-blown glass bottles, cowlin pipes, and this trend kind of continued over the years of finding a mix. I did want to point out Dr. Robert Hall, who was a UIC professor. And he, I believe, is the one who recovered the horse. And just to point it out real quick, there is the horse, I think. But yeah, he recovered the horse and it was likely brought to UIC by him, potentially. We don't have any written record of that. There were at least 2 horses, and this horse still had its iron shoes attached. UIC has 1 shoe. I do not know if it belongs to this horse, but we think it might. I showed it, I think, back on like the first slide. It's very flaky and trying to disintegrate. I've thought about, trying to get the rust off, but it's a little dicey there. So I have no knowledge if this was a formal burial of a horse or not. I do think it probably must have been based on the condition of the bones, which you will get into. But yeah, so again, that's the horse. And then there's also another horse that I cut off, but it was up here. Okay, I will try to make this as interesting as possible. So some of the elements that UIC has are pretty surprising. We are missing 1 leg, which I've grayed out here. But we do have elements such as the stylohyoids, which are right here. They're very gracile and very fragile, and that's something that is so rarely. Like it's very thin. It should be breakable and like disintegrate pretty easily. We also do not have most of the caudal vertebrae, so the tail. And I just wanted to very quickly mention that it's possible that the horse's tail was docked. In the late 1800s, they did start fining people for docking horses' tails. But that wasn't always a deterrent. It was also a style thing. And of course, there is a chance that those parts of this horse just got lost. And as I mentioned, it probably was a formal burial, as in they dug a hole and covered it really well, because there's no evidence of rodents or carnivores or any modification caused by humans. So it definitely wasn't a processed horse. UIC also has a 3rd femur and a 2nd mandible fragment. So we have at least 2 horses. And of course, it's not clear if they came from that site. Just the one is clear that it came from the site we're discussing. And also I want to very quickly say the right leg, the bottom, the digit part, is also possibly unassociated based on basically how it looks. And as this skeleton was used for teaching for many years, since they really had no idea what it was or if it was interesting, I suppose, it's really heavily cracked. The bones are warped and they're really friable. So when you kind of pick them up, they're trying to disintegrate in your hand. Okay, so the skull, I have grayed out up here what we don't have. Not all the fragments are present, and some of them have probably just disintegrated. I've got 4 large fragments that allow for the placement of all the upper molars and premolars. The mandible is in really good condition. All those molars and premolars are in place too. There are no wolf's teeth, and those are these little tiny teeth that are kind of in the diastema. A lot of vets pull those teeth. Or they sometimes just don't develop. There are 2 lower canines, but not 2 upper canines. Either they didn't develop or we don't have them, and I'll get into why that matters in a minute. But yeah, that's the view from, this is the view from the top and the bottom and the side. Okay, so this horse has a lot wrong with it. So I am not going to go through all of it. So these are just highlights, but all of the cervical, so the neck and thoracic, the upper back vertebrae are accounted for, but a lot of the spinous processes, which are these, are just broken or split open. So there's a lot that we couldn't tell from that. There is proliferative growth on all of these vertebrae, and that is essentially, imagine how a bone is supposed to look, and it's a lot of bone that has grown outside of that bone. T1 and T2, which are over here, this is just for an example. They've got this, which is a little harder to see than I thought it would be, but this is an example of what that growth looks like. T3 over here has this, which is also unfortunately hard to tell up there, but it's essentially what's called a periosteal reaction, and the bone is lifting up from other bone. It's about 2 centimeters long. And then T4 and T5 have these osteophytes that touch each other, which would have been pretty painful.
Is this like arthritis or something?
It's hard to say if it's arthritis or not, but yeah, it's close. It's basically like the way that they were touching each other, they started to grow out. And they were rubbing up against each other.
Probably their horse,
We'll get to that.
especially if it's dead.
Yes, there is a whole slide on how old this horse is. We'll get there. And just more examples. This is, imagine that these articular processes here are half the size. That's how big they should be. These are too big, too growy. And this is part of the lumbar. It's all fused together. Only 2 of the lumbar, which is lower back, are unfused. But this is actually not that abnormal for horses. When you ride a horse like repeatedly, they tend to fuse together to stabilize. So that one's not too strange, but it's interesting to look at. This is something that has stumped me forever, and I still don't have an answer. But the ulna both have this is like an infection. It's not supposed to look like that. It's all pitted. And even stranger is this growth it's about 2 centimeters long and 1 centimeter up. It's not cancer or anything. It's probably something that was rubbing against it, but it's in such an awkward position on a horse. I have no idea what would be causing it. So if anyone knows, you can tell me. That would be awesome. But I have not been able to figure it out. And the radius, which articulates with this ulna, it has the same kind of reaction going on. So there was definitely something wrong. Just other very quick things. The right central tarsal, which is like an ankle, all the little ankle bones are fused together. The first rib is also pitting and has some kind of infection looking type stuff. There's also evidence of new growth on the femur and humerus. osteophytes on the pelvis, which is just more bone growth. So just imagine a very sick horse. Okay, so for the sex, there are several ways to do this. I'll try to go through this quickly, but first you can use the canines, which is why I brought those up earlier. Male horses have 4 canines and females have less than 4 or just smaller canines. So this horse has 2 well-developed canines, and it's unlikely that the upper 2 were lost during excavation if we've got some of these other elements. But either way, the canines could really still indicate male or female. So this is not an exact science. The other way is pelvic measurements. I essentially kind of calculated the ratio, kind of like in humans, like is it more round or more narrow? And again, not very exact, especially when you consider geldings. So the overlap is pretty large between mares and geldings. But overall, based on both those things put together, I would say this horse is likely a male. The age, there are, again, 2 techniques that I used. First is cheek tooth measurements, which is how far these teeth have erupted, because they grow and they're worn down by eating. And this can be affected by the diet and environments. And in addition, this technique was also developed on smaller ponies. So that needs to be taken into account. But the result I got through these measurements is about 13. And then there's also incisor analysis, which is what vets and breeders use still today. And essentially, the incisor changes shape as it's worn down. And so do like these parts inside the incisor called cups and dental stars. They kind of move around, and you can look at charts and try to figure it out. But this method is a little more difficult to do on archaeological specimens. So for example, this horse had cracks along the accusal surface, the grinding surface, which kind of obscured the appearance. But the age I got from that was 12 plus minus 1 year. So this horse is between 11 and 13, and that's not that old for a horse. And I'm not going to go into all this because no one wants that. But so horses are measured at the withers or shoulders by hands. I'm sure people have heard like 16 hands. But just to sum all this up, it's very large size at about 16 hands. And the slenderness index is something that people use to try to determine size, also size and breed. Very not exact, but you can do this by, what did I do here? Okay. Sorry. Well, anyway, you can do this by measuring the smallest width of diaphysis and the greatest length of the 3rd metacarpal. Sorry, hold on. Sorry about that. So in sum, it's kind of between slender and semi-robust. It's in the middle, essentially. So taking all this into account, the horse is larger and slightly robust, which, just to put that into perspective, it's not a Shire or a Clydesdale, but still probably in the draft horse category. Sure. Yes, it could be a Percheron. Oh, there we go. Okay. So evidence of writing. So now I'm just going to go through kind of the inferences that we can make from all of that data. So I looked at bitware analysis, but there is no evidence of bitware, unfortunately, because basically what you can do is sometimes if a horse is a bridle biter, they'll like chew on the bit, it'll wear down the lower premolars. But this horse's, both of them were kind of cracked, so I didn't feel like I could use that. There's also, you can look at the diastema, which is the space between the incisors and the premolars, And sometimes if the bridle is not fitting properly, it'll wear down on that diastema and kind of like grow some of that bone, kind of like how we saw earlier, which is not great. But there's no evidence of that either. But that doesn't mean that a bridle wasn't worn. It probably just maybe was fitting correctly. And as far as writing, the vertebral changes reflect that. The changes that I went over in the lower thoracic and the lumbar are a part of that. And also the tarsal fusion are also evidence of writing. Okay, the evidence of traction. The rest of the vertebral pathologies, all those upper level ones, are probably from traction. Those osteophytes that I showed you that you asked if those were arthritis, that's probably from it. The little periosteal reaction could have been from an ill-fitting collar. The fused metacarpal is very fused for that horse's age. So that could also be part of it. And the ulnas, which I'll get a little bit more into that, but that could also be part of it. So yeah, basically the horse was used for being ridden and for traction. The cause of death, again, the skull broke in excavation or during storage. I am not sure when. So I don't have any evidence of euthanasia. I tried to put some of those fragments back together to see if I could see like any radial fractures, because basically about here is where you would euthanize a horse, and just to see if that was what happened, and you would have had these radial fractures coming out from that on the bones, but I did not see any. So there's no direct evidence of euthanasia. But back to those ulnas, some researchers that I've talked to about this believe that it's way too advanced to be work-related at all. And that a lot of these osteological changes we've gone over are a horrible infection that could have originated at some point in the body and just spread everywhere. And that could have put an end to this horse, unfortunately. Okay, so while we can't say for certain, it's likely that this horse probably came around 1900. I don't think it's as old as that trading post era. It likely performed multiple types of work based on all these changes. And since the horse is only middle-aged, because sometimes they're living to like 30, these changes probably are a result of overwork at a really young age. All the fusion of those tarsals, the ulnas, basically every change probably made movement pretty difficult and pretty painful. This could be potential evidence for being cared for beyond its productivity level, and subsequently provide potential support for the existence of that rehabilitative pasture if someone was trying to take care of it. So I want to bring us back to the information we discussed about Chicago and the city horses earlier in the presentation. So unfortunately, I don't think it's possible to rule out or confirm that it was a police or fire horse. Police rode and used horses to pull carriages, which this horse has both of those. So similar conditions are seen on other types of workhorses, however. So police and fire horses were rarely retained beyond their functioning and would be sold before that point. And due to the high level of care for civil horses, it's unlikely, I think, that a police horse would end up in this condition, unless, of course, it was an infection. And another issue is, why was this horse not sent to slaughter? Because as we discussed, even the 1900s, it still probably would have been processed. I think if it was a former civil horse, it maybe would have been buried and preserved, like they didn't want to process it. And of course, one issue that I want to do further research in is all those pathological changes and the infection. I can't do a differential diagnosis, so I'd like to talk to a vet pathologist at some point to see if they have seen anything similar before or if they have any knowledge of what that could be. And of course, we're missing that one leg. So if if an infection originated in that leg, we would have no idea. So potentially. So I guess unfortunately, we don't have a real answer on if what this horse was, what it was doing, and why it was there. I looked for a very long time through the newspapers and research, and I got very, very frustrated. But I guess that's also something I was told that just happens a lot in archaeology. There's just not always a completely satisfactory answer. So I'm still kind of researching this on the side. So maybe we'll find something at some point. And if I talk to a vet pathologist, but as of right now, all we really know is it was sick, it was ridden, it was used for traction. Yeah. So I think that still in some ways there's value in this. I think that it kind of tells us a little bit potentially about some of the activities that were going on there. But I also want to point out that we should be doing more work in these legacy collections. We should be doing archaeological analysis on things that we already have in collections. Like we thought that this horse was nothing. And I just started looking at it and we found a bunch of stuff that was pretty interesting and made a whole project about it. So I hope that more people start doing this in universities and museums. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So is it Brego or Bill? Bill was Samwise Gamgee.
Yeah. It's
Brego.
Aragorn.
And then if we can repeat the questions for our at-home audience, that would be great. Let me see if I can.
It's been 40 years.
Yeah, I think the answer is maybe somewhere in between. It's probably closer to an Aragorn's horse, but it's definitely not. I mean, Sam's horse was a draft pony, so it was really small. Yeah, and this is a very big horse.
See if I can get this.
Shadow fence. There's a white stallion. Yeah.
I'm gonna go get on the internet to look up the name of the horse and now.
Oh, great. So we have a
Oh, what is? Can I?
yeah, please
Okay.
do.
Lori asks, what is traction? Traction is a horse or cattle or any kind of animal that's pulling a carriage or a plow, any of those tools.
Okay, great. All right, additional questions?
Given the time, obviously many horses were abused in terms of work, but they were also valuable tools. So to what extent, I mean, was the horse sufficiently valuable that you would not, not want it to develop arthritis or whatever? I mean, to what extent then, what did they, if a horse was beyond the age where it could be used, what did they get from sending it to the tanners? I mean,
Cash.
yeah, I know. How much? I mean, was it an indication that they didn't need money, that they would bury a horse instead of, or did it just drop dead and they couldn't get it to the tanners?
Usually well, to answer that last part first, they would come and pick it up. And it wasn't, I'm not sure in the context of the time period, but it was like a few dollars, which I'm sure was something. And I think it probably depended on the context. I mean, that was kind of something that was difficult for this, was I wasn't, it's always hard to say, like, to justify what's overwork and what's abuse. And I think that they had different concepts of that back then, because they were tools. Not that everyone saw it that way. I think a lot of people probably saw, this is my pet. But they were extremely valuable. So it's kind of, I don't know, that's kind of a hard question to answer.
Do you think the fact that it was just like buried, I think the follow just up on that, like the fact that it was buried and not processed, I mean, is that just like, again, a topic that you talk about, like the evidence of care? Like that they just, it was a pet, it was an animal.
Yeah.
Like,
I think so. I do. It's just hard to, justify that. It's hard to say, like, this is definitely the case, but I think so. Whilst, I mean, it's not easy to dig a hole to roll a horse into. That's a lot of effort, and there's different reasons to do that. But, if this horse is from like 1910, then, someone probably did care about it.
And something, because I remember this horse, like I'm a grad student 2 decades before you, and I remember this horse all over the anthropology department. That's just an aside, but the fact that like they're like, horses were ubiquitous, there were millions in the city, and yet finding another historical example to talk about is so rare because they were processed, they were used after the fact. What is your nearest comparative historical element, or do you have to go to ancient examples or modern examples?
Most of what I was using was ancient, as a comparison, which was extremely frustrating because I didn't know if there was a difference. I mean, so all the work that I was doing on like aging and sex and pathologies, it was all done on these horses from like China, which is a big place for horse recovery, apparently. So I'm trying to think. I know I was trying to find one, and I found a few things from Jamestown, and I know the museum has one comparative of a historic horse, but I didn't get a chance to really look at it. So no, it's not super satisfactory answer there. But Jamestown is the only place that there's also that I found that's like another almost full North American around that time period. But then, as we've talked to people before, I think you were there for this conversation where we were talking to someone, they're like, well, I can tell you where a historic horse is. Or you go and talk to a bunch of people who own horses around here, and they'll be like, well, I have horses buried in my backyard. Do you want them? So they're there. It's just for some reason we don't recover them.
And do you think that's like strong enough evidence for like that archaeology of care, which is something like finding emotions in the archaeological record is very difficult. How do you judge an emotion? But like the fact that there was millions of these animals and there's so few of them that seem to be buried and cared for,
I don't think they weren't all cared for. No, I said they weren't.
Oh, they weren't. Well, obviously.
Yeah.
They went.
But then at the same time, I don't know if we can say that they weren't cared for just because they were processed.
When you mentioned the standards, and that's obviously it is an opportunity for many of them to send it.
Yep.
Yeah, I would guess that as time went on, there wasn't this big industry for whatever you want to call it, recycling of animals, that there was 150 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Was there horse racing?
There was. Yeah, there were quite a few horse race tracks. I never looked that close into it. I didn't think that based on some of its stature, that it was very likely a horse racing horse.
It was too big to be a racehorse?
Not necessarily, but I
Okay.
didn't feel like it was, I just didn't go that far into it, to be honest. I didn't feel like it was the strongest line of evidence. So, but it's possible. It's just, it was so young, and I do think, I mean, I can't say this because I'm not a vet, I'm not a doctor, but I do think it had some sort of really bad infection there. I think something was super wrong with it. So, someone I talked to once told me that they saw a very similar thing, in another horse once, and it had gotten like twine wrapped around its leg, and that started a full body infection. Sorry, I went on a tangent there.
Helpful, yeah.
So much a question of a comment, but I appreciate the value of doing this kind of work, that just, first of all, just because you can't get answers doesn't mean you shouldn't ask questions.
Yeah.
And also in terms of, I've done some work on legacy collections, but as a sort of caveat to archaeologists, the one person that did in fact give the field number, the site number, it's important to keep records, because you don't know what questions people in the future are going to ask that you don't really care about.
Well, it was so, I don't think I actually said it in the presentation, but the field in the feature and the site number that were listed were not even on the bone. They were on these paper bags that the bones were wrapped in. And we didn't even know until I was working on it for a while that that's what it was. We just weren't really paying attention. It was just these paper bags. So I was like, no one wrote down, I mean, the man, Robert Hall, was retired like a long time before I started working on this. So maybe he had notes somewhere in his personal belongings. But I wish there was, I think it kind of is just like more evidence of like people need to like be very careful about recording these things and like keeping it with the bones. And of course, like I think part of the issue was when these were excavated in the 70s, they just didn't think it was important because they were specifically looking for that trading post, which may or may not be there. So they thought it was an intrusive and didn't matter.
I think Robert Hall's papers are at UIC.
I don't think they're there. I think he died. I think he died.
He died.
I think he died.
Oh, he did.
Okay, yeah.
I know Bob.
Oh, okay.
And James Brown might be one who would know something, but I really suspect that his papers
Are buried somewhere
are someplace,
in the.
but that doesn't necessarily mean that they would have, sort of incidental field work. And because he did a lot of papers and contributed to a lot of books and everything. So I knew Bob Hall since about the 70s. So.
Okay, all right, I'll try to ask around and see if anyone knows what happened to all those papers. Thank you.
James?
Where's all the other artifacts? Are there any other artifacts from any other excavations, and where?
They belong to the Illinois State Museum.
Historic stuff or just ancient?
Both.
Both.
I'm curious, you said you were doing research from newspapers. How do you get the local newspapers, the old newspapers? How do you access those out of curiosity?
Through databases.
Okay. But the databases are through the university or they're public? Okay.
Yeah, well, there's some you can get through like the public libraries, like
Okay.
each public library has a different one, but UIC has a little bit more.
Mhm.
But there's, and again, like a lot of these things, maybe there's probably more in archives
Mhm.
and things, but it's kind of limited what you can find online.
Yeah, I've used newspapers.com and
Yeah.
that's paid for.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of newspapers that you can't get access to through that service.
Apparently you can go on eBay.
eBay, what just buy
old newspapers. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
very,
shot in the dark, but
yeah, that'd be, then you actually have to, you can't search them, you know,
no, yeah, you have to read them.
you have to actually read all of them.
Yep.
when they were microdishing them, and how that all gets eventually put into a circular format, who knows?
It's very possible there's a ton more information out there, and I just.
We have a question from Bill Green. I think Barbara Hall or their daughters are still alive and can answer questions about his notes.
And they're at the Newberry.
Oh, they're at the Newberry Library.
Wow, I had no idea.
Thank you, Bill Green.
Thank you, Bill.
This is the reason why we have this community.
Yeah, I was hoping someone might know something.
Yeah,
And
that's
makes
wonderful.
sense. That makes as much sense as being at UIC or the State Museum.
Wonderful. Yeah, I've used newspapers.com to research my family history, and I was surprised at how much local newspapers would put in there. It was like the Facebook of the time. I mean, just random gossip, any
The
sort of.
gossip is the
Yeah.
fun part. I went on a tangent when I was researching the Ogdens and his family.
Mhm.
Very scandalous sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
It was it like political?
It was
The
like
scandal?
marriages, murder,
Oh,
you know,
wow.
that kind of stuff. It was, I don't remember all the details now. It was one of his nieces was married to someone who may have killed someone. You know,
Yeah.
you just kind of get distracted when you start digging around in these things.
Mhm.
And it's specific to their particular interest area, but with the Finding Your Roots program, to the
Mhm.
extent that they go into the genealogies of people, their researchers spend a lot of time in newspapers.
Mhm. Yeah, and even though they were in the newspaper, doesn't necessarily mean it was true. Same
It's
thing like the
true.
internet of today, just because it's there, it's not necessarily true.
The whole doctor said, all I know is what I read in the paper. Well, he was being sarcastic.
Yes. I was-
Ironic.
That's what I was wondering when I was reading that very like sensationalized article about them stealing horses in the night to the
Mm.
stockyards. I was like, okay, well, this is a fun article, but
Yeah.
you know, are they,
Is it true?
yeah.
That reminds me, was that there was a political campaign, what was it in the 1700s or 1800s, where they were accusing the opponent of the sister being a thespian, and people didn't know what it meant, and yeah, I mean,
Sounded terrible.
it sounded
It
terrible.
does.
So, yeah, these tactics are not new. Well, great. Any other questions? All right, well, we don't have any events coming up except for the summer safari, which we haven't officially announced. But oh, thank you. We haven't officially announced the date for that yet, but I would hope everybody goes to our website, and for our members, the codex, check your codex for announcements about when the summer safari will be coming up, and our events are here. We have our lecture series, so we will have in-person events back, and for some reason my thing's gonna die. Oh, you know what? It hasn't been charging. No.
You could tell them what the summer safari is going to be about.
Yeah, so the summer safari is a tour of the Art Institute by Michael Ruggieri. So there's some incredible collections there. Oh, I think I missed something. Did I? Let's see. Oh,
And he's going to give us a lecture by Zoom first.
okay. So there's gonna be a lecture via Zoom first before we go to the museum. So we got an idea of what we're gonna see, and then we will be back in person together. Do we have it on here yet? We do not have our fall yet. First Sunday in September, we will be back together. Again, check the website, check your newsletters for upcoming announcements. 20th of September is our next one. 28th of September is our next
And
meeting.
we're downstairs.
Okay, any other announcements?
And the September 28th one is gonna be Bill Eisminger, who's long time at Cahokia.
Okay, Bill Eisinger,
Eiseminger.
Eisinger.
Minger. Eiseminger.
Okay, discussion about Cahokia.
Oh, what he
Okay.
doesn't know about Cahokia is unknowable.
Okay.
Bring your question.
So we hope that the ones that can join us in person will in September. And if you can't, well, there's Zoom also. We still want you to come. Thank you for your support. Thank you for coming.